Hey, good morning. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. And thank you for tuning in from wherever it is you're tuning in from. Maybe your backyard, your kitchen, your family room, dining room, maybe even another city, country, province. Let us know in the chat room. And if you're feeling brave enough, send us a picture of what you're watching on, whether it's a phone or a tablet or who you're watching with. Send it in to the address on the screen. It's a great way for us to stay connected even when we're apart. Just want to change things up a little bit this morning here. Just want to let you know of some things that are coming up today and in the next couple of weeks. So for today, as Peter mentioned really quickly in the opening, we are celebrating communion. That's going to take place right after the message. We're going to do the message, then a song, and then communion. So this could be a chance for you to, if you forgot, to grab any juice, crackers, bread, anything you want to use for that, so you can participate. But communion, if you're not familiar with what it is, it's just a time that we come together and just quiet down and reflect and remember all that Jesus has done for us. And if you've never experienced it, man, this is a great chance to experience it from the comfort of your own home. So we invite you to stick around. We're going to be singing some songs after communion, and they're upbeat, fast. They've been doing an awesome job today. Second thing that's happening today, at 1 o'clock, we're having our third of our 4 TMP kickoffs. So this is our second to last one. We got one more coming up in September. Weather's hanging on. I know there's some rain in the forecast, but we're going to be long done before that. So make sure you head to one of the 3 locations. We have Westwood Lake. Look for Peter and Emily Bird at Second Beach, second parking lot. Neck Point, Glenn and Cheryl Haywood will be there. Once you enter the parking lot, you'll see the grassy area. And Parksville Beach, look for Lauren and Stuart Whitworth by the skateboard park, which is next to the gravel parking area. So 1 o'clock today, make sure you come to one of those. I've been to the last few, and man, I saw people I haven't seen since March. And it was so refreshing to see. So if you haven't taken advantage of that, come. It's all socially distanced and all that type of stuff. So make sure you come to that. Then Sunday, September 13th, which is only a couple of weeks away, hard to believe, we're having kickoff. And yes, it's going to look a little different this year, but this is the Sunday, if you're not familiar with kickoff, this is the Sunday that we kind of generate a bunch of energy as we launch into the fall. And we've got some really cool things planned, so we're going to outline some of those. So make sure you tune in and join us on Sunday, September 13th. And then for the last 2 Sundays of September, we're going to do something completely different, very practical, very relevant. We're going to have experts from both the school district and the medical community on 2 different Sundays come and talk about COVID and school and COVID and you. And we're going to just kind of open up, if we have time, where you can ask your questions, but it's going to be kind of like an open forum where we're just going to be answering some of the questions that are kicking around. So make sure you tune in for those. And again, I just want to say a big thank you to Peter and the band for pulling off that song, Time, by Pink Floyd. I put in a special request a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, could you guys do this song? And Peter was like, sure, yeah, we can do that. And I thought they did an excellent job. And Pink Floyd, the reason I wanted them to do this song is because, man, they absolutely nail the progression of life. And they do it with an almost haunting accuracy. Ticking away the moments that make up a dull day, you fritter and waste the hours in an offhand way. That was true for me. I remember as a 13-year-old kid frittering and wasting the hours of summer vacation in an offhand way with my best friend who lived right next door to me, where I grew up in North Vancouver. We had a really cool backyard, both of us, in that there was a green belt, so no houses could be built, there was no developments, and right in the center of it, there was a creek that ran through it. It was surrounded by trees and stuff, and it was a great place to go in the heat of the summer, and it was full of like frogs and fish. And so we would go down there, and for hours we'd chase and catch frogs and tadpoles and minnows and all that kind of stuff. And if we got bored with that, well, there was always ants to get with your magnifying glass, right? That's just what kid boys did. But after we finished wreaking havoc with the pond life and the local insect life, we would sit back on the banks of this creek and we would just kind of daydream about life and what it would be like in the future. And, we'd lay on our backs and we'd look up through the poplar trees that were there at the summer sky, and we just imagine ourselves being 30. 30 years old. I mean, for a 13-year-old, that's old, right? And so we would think about that and we'd start to laugh because we'd think, man, 30? That meant we drove like a station wagon. I don't know if you remember those. They were like 3 city blocks long. They had wood paneling stickers on the side because someone thought that looked cool. I'm not sure why. But it meant, they were just the 70s version of what we now call an SUV or a minivan. But what it meant was you had kids. And we would look at each other and say, I can't imagine you with kids. My friend would look at me and said, you with kids? And we'd both like, no way, man. It'll never happen. And I have 3 daughters. And then as we lay there, we'd go way into the future. We'd think, okay, 30 is one thing. But could you imagine being 40? Like 40 years old? And to us, we knew the 40-year-olds in the neighborhood, what they were like. They were grumpy and humorless. And here's why I say that. My friends and I used to play this game. It seems kind of lame now, but it was fun back then. We would go up and we would just pound incessantly or ring the doorbell, like ding, 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 until we heard somebody coming to answer. And then we'd all run away and hide in the bushes and laugh when they kind of looked around. And we'd just keep doing it. And they would all of a sudden get mad. It was just like they didn't find the same humor in it we did. And so they came across as grumpy. And they were probably grumpy because, at age, 40-year-olds have hair growing in spots that you shouldn't have hair, like out of your ears and out of your nose. You are young and life is long. And then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. Have you ever had that happen? That was certainly my experience, man. It seemed like in the proverbial snap of a finger, I went from a 13-year-old know-it-all standing on the banks of this little creek to a far more mature 23-year-old know-it-all standing at the altar saying, I do to my high school sweetheart. Time, as a child, seems to be going by at a nice, leisurely, walking pace. But as you get older, it seems to progress to a steady jog. And every year is getting shorter. Never seem to find the time. And don't you find that to be true? If you're watching and you're under 30, you're probably thinking, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, you just wait. It boggles the mind how much faster time seems to go by the older you get. Last month, my youngest daughter, Emily, celebrated her wedding anniversary. And I remember coming to my wife saying, I can't believe Emily's been married 5 years already. And my wife looks at me and she says, 5 years? Like, try 9. And just like that, I lost 4 years. And the other day, this one hurt more, I think. The other day, I get an email, and it's from the grad committee of the high school where I graduated. And it was an email with a whole bunch of information telling us how our plans for our 40-year grad reunion are on hold because of COVID-19. And I remember reading that going, it's been 40 years since I graduated? It's like, really? Say it ain't so. The older we get, it's funny, and I've done this myself. We all seem to say the same thing, regardless of what age we're at. For instance, we turned 30. I remember turning 30, and what I said was, oh man, life is good. I've got life by the tail. This is it. I've arrived. But then 40 hits. And what do we say? Oh man, I thought life was good at 30. 40's where it's at. 40's the new 30. And that saying then morphs into, when you turn 50, that, man, you haven't lived until you're 50. And life at 50 is really interesting, isn't it? When you're young, you wake up and you might be sore, but you know why you're sore. You know, you fell off your bike, you wiped out on the ski hill, you got crushed into the boards playing hockey, you ran a marathon, something like that. Man, when you're 50, you have no idea why. You just wake up and you're sore. You know, you wake up and it's like, oh, I think I slept wrong on my shoulder or something. Like, ooh. And if that isn't bad enough, when you look in the mirror, there's always a new wrinkle, another gray hair, more sag, more bag, more gut, and more butt. It's just the way it is. You know, my best friend and I, we'd be laying on the bank, and, you know, we go through the 40s and the 50s, and then we go, man, let's go way out there. Can you imagine being 70, 80? What about 90? And I mean, we'd just be splitting a gut laughing. And then we would say, well, what about 100? Can you imagine being 100? And a funny thing happened when we got to 100. We stopped laughing. Because at 100, all of a sudden, the thing that entered the conversation and our imagination was that of death and dying. And we were far too young at 13 to be thinking of stuff like that. But for many, young and old, the prospect of dying brings up a lot of anxiety. And it's not surprising given the definition of anxiety, which is this. It's a feeling of worry, of nervousness or unease, typically about an imminent event. It doesn't get much more imminent than death. As the saying goes, none of us are getting out of this being life alive, right? Everyone knows it's coming. We don't know when, we just know it's coming at some point. And I don't know too many people that are really looking forward to it. And so we run and we run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking. Racing around to come up behind you again. The sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older. Shorter of breath, one day closer to death. You know, sometimes in order to escape the fear of death, we look for ways, you know, consciously and unconsciously, to distract ourselves from it, to relieve the stress. And we do things like we get involved in high adrenaline sports and activities, you know, like skydiving or mountain climbing or car or motorcycle racing, things like that make us feel alive. And to a degree, we almost feel like immortal, like because we're cheating death and defying death with what we're doing. And others, if they're not into that, they turn to drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, food, pornography, work, in order to numb the reality of our mortality. And so the question becomes like, well, what can we do? Is it even possible to kind of get over this fear, this anxiety that comes when we think about our demise? And I want to suggest this morning that yes, it is possible. It is possible. But the solution isn't found in a pill or a bottle or some death-defying activity. It's found in a person. A person who loves and cares for you more than you could ever begin to imagine. And that person is Jesus Christ. I want to share some words from the Bible. They're found in the New Testament in a book called Hebrews, which is just another name for the Jewish people. They were known as Hebrews. And this book, this letter was written to them, to those that had kind of moved away from Judaism to follow Jesus. They had heard enough about him dying and coming back from the dead, people seeing him after he was resurrected from the dead. And one thing that Jesus said to his closest followers before he went to heaven and left this earth, he said, I'm coming back to get you. So hang in there. I'm coming back. Don't lose faith, so to speak. And some of these people, their timeline was like, well, he's coming tomorrow or he's coming the next day. And as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, for a Jew to kind of turn their back on their religion that was their identity meant they were often kicked out of the family unit. They lost their ability to work. And so as time went by, they were tempted to just bail on this whole idea and maybe think that, Jesus was just another guy that had some great teaching, but in the end, he just died. Maybe I'd be better off going back to my family and what I believe to be true. So this guy writes a letter to them, and he says this. Listen to this. He says, since the children have flesh and blood, he, and he's referring to Jesus, too shared in their humanity. And what he's pointing to there is the Christmas story, the incarnation of Christ. The root word for incarnation is carne, which means to put meat on, which is what God did when he stepped across the universe and came to this planet. He took on flesh and blood and bone and became human, still remaining God. It's a hard concept to grab, but that's what he did. But think about that reality for a second. God, the creator of everything you see, the sun, the stars, the moon, the mountains, the sea, the trees, you, me, came to this earth as a man, Jesus Christ. The question is why? Well, the writer continues. He says, so that by his death, which, time out for a second there. Let that sink in for a minute. Jesus, who is God, creator of everything, was willing to die at the hands of his creation? That seems like, that's crazy talk. Back when this was written, that was unthinkable, because the belief back then was that people died for their gods. Gods didn't die for their people. But that's what God did. He came to this planet to demonstrate his over-the-top love for us by becoming one of us and to give his life so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by what? Their fear of death. Good news in this is Jesus didn't stay dead. He rose again from the dead. That's the Easter story. And because of Jesus' resurrection, it's possible for you and I to live life free from the slavery of the fear of death. In 2006, my dad underwent heart surgery. And although it was considered routine, just a few years ago, it still came with risks, which makes sense. When you're removing somebody's heart from their body to work on it, it comes with risks. And unfortunately, I was away working. I was in the Queen Charlotte Islands, and I was trying to get home, but trying to get home from there down to Nanaimo, Victoria, was next to impossible. I was able to get a flight, but it was going to be the day after his surgery. And I wanted to talk to him because you just never know, right? And so I was in the Sandspit Airport in Queen Charlotte Islands, and I called him. And it was a day before the surgery, and I phoned him, and just to see how he was doing. And I said, Dad, how are you doing? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, I'm okay. Even if things go completely sideways and I don't make it through, I'm going to be okay. I know where I'm going. Put another way, what he was saying was, son, I'm not afraid to die. You might ask the question, well, why? How? And it was because of his relationship and his belief in Jesus Christ. My dad was confident that God had him. And he believed that so much that it brought him a peace. Just knowing that whatever happened, he was truly going to be okay. Now, you could argue and say, well, those are just simply words of a guy that is facing imminent surgery, and whether he's worried about it or not, like, what else are you going to say? Yeah, I'll give you that. But here, listen to this. He truly meant what he said. Because on May 4th, 2017, 6 years later, I had the privilege of holding my dad's hand as he passed from this life into the next. And it was the hardest thing I've ever been through up until now in my life, but it's also been one of the most beautiful experiences ever. I mean, it was hard because my dad was gone. He physically wasn't with us anymore, which meant there would be no more laughing and joking over a coffee and breakfast. I wouldn't be able to come to him and ask him a question or some advice as I was maybe grappling with some kind of a decision. I wouldn't be able to fight with him over the turkey and chicken carcasses that we, both love to pick clean after a meal. I wouldn't be able to learn from him as I helped him work on cars. There wouldn't be any of that anymore. And that was hard. But holding my dad's hand was also the most beautiful experience I've ever had. Because even as he lay there breathing his last few breaths, there was a look on his face and a look in his eyes, and it wasn't the look of fear. It was the look of complete peace. I was reminded of the words of David and Goliath fame, who when he was facing what he thought was going to be his imminent demise, he wrote these words. He says, "Why would I fear the future? For your goodness," and he's referring to God's goodness, he says, "For your goodness and love pursue me all the days of my life. And then afterwards, when my life is through, when I die, I'll return to your glorious presence to be forever with you." That moment that my dad and I shared at on his deathbed that day did more to deepen my belief in and strengthen my faith in Jesus. And when I talk about faith, there's a lot of things that come to mind for people when they hear that word faith. But what I mean by that is, the way our working definition that we use around for that at the meeting place, and it's this: that faith is having confidence that Jesus is who he says he is, God, and that he is good and he can be trusted to do everything he promised to do. And one of the things he promised to do is that if we believe in him, if we believe that he was truly the Son of God, that we will share in eternal life. It's John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, Jesus, so that whoever believes in him would not perish or die, but have everlasting life." And so in that moment, when my dad passed, I knew that God was good. I knew that he cared about me and that I could trust him to be with me every step of the way in this life and in the next. And that deepening, that strengthening of my belief has brought me so much peace. And the same can be true for you. If there's ever a formula or some instructions that you and I can kind of put into practice to help us break free from this fear of death, they're not found in some self-help book on Kindle or in chapters. They're found in the Bible, written by a guy named Paul, who was able to find peace even though he had plenty to worry about, seeing that he was sitting in prison and his future looked all but grim. And in that moment, he pens these words. He says, "Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. And his peace, God's peace, will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus." What beautiful, beautiful words. Believing in the God who created you, who came to this planet, who voluntarily gave up his life so that you and I could live and free us from that fear of death, can make you the most incurable optimist ever, even in the face of a pandemic where the headlines scream death tolls and everything else. Or whether your body is failing you because you're getting older, or your body's been invaded by some disease. You can be an eternal optimist because you know here in the depth of your being that God is with you. Not only in this life, but he'll be waiting in the next. Jesus' resurrection, man, it changed everything. And it's what can allow us to live a life free from anxiety, from the worry, from the dread, from the despair, and from the fear of death. And that freedom is available to anyone, anytime. And so I'm going to close in prayer here in just a minute. And I want to give you an opportunity where you can actually just surrender yourself and just say, God, I can't do this on my own anymore. And I need you in my life. And so I'm going to pray a prayer. And I invite you to pray that prayer in your heart. And then share with the hosts on the chat room. Just go to the prayer room and just say, hey, I've done this. And I want to know what my next steps are. But before I do that, I want to leave you with a question, and it's this. What would it look like? What would it look like for you to begin to trust and to know, perhaps again in the new way or for the first time, that God cares for you and that he can be trusted and he will meet you right in the middle of your fear? We don't have to, as the song says, hang on in quiet desperation, because we can call out to a God who is always listening and always ready to respond and always willing to come alongside of us and walk with us through our biggest fear. And I don't know where that lands with you, but just hope that you would kind of roll that around and see what that looks like for you. Thanks for being on this journey with me. I'd invite you to pray with me. Father God, every one of us is going to die. There's no way out of this. And for many of us, that our death it seems like the end, that's it. There is no more life after that. But your death and resurrection is proof that death isn't the end. Rather, it's just the beginning of something beautiful. And we can experience that freedom that comes with knowing you personally. And that relationship is available to anyone, anytime, no matter what we've done, what we haven't done, or what's been done to us, by simply inviting you into our lives. Dear Jesus, thank you for making me and loving me. Even when I've ignored you and gone my own way. I realize that I need you in my life, and I'm sorry for my sin. I ask you to forgive me. I thank you for dying on the cross for me. Just help me understand it more. And as much as I know how, I want to follow you from now on. Please come into my life and make me a new person inside. And help me to grow as a follower of you. Amen.